That's really interesting. I mean, it is, as you say, far away in the future. I mean, you talk about the Malaysian Airlines, but you were completely essential through mapping and everything you did in uncovering the fact that it was Russian separatists. Did you ever see that turn into anything, in terms of accountability?
Well, there's the trial in the Netherlands at the moment that's drawing on a wide range of evidence. Some of our work has been cited there, but I think for that, it was more about I kind of wonder if it wasn't for the work of Bellingcat, what would have been the public kind of perception of what happened, because you had relentless Russian disinformation around MH17, and we were really the only people who were kind of really pushing back against that in a really big way, that we were able to kind of debunk all their claims, just tear apart the lies that they were telling and present that in a way that reached a lot of people. So even though that there wasn't the kind of traditional kind of legal accountability, a lot of what's happening in Ukraine now is happening because of the community that developed around MH17 and the trust that was built there. So I think there's stuff that's happening that wouldn't be happening if it wasn't all that work that was done on MH17.
It's really interesting. Another really important question comes from Leanne Charlie. Fantastic talk. Thanks for all your incredibly valuable work. How much of a danger is there that by releasing your techniques for others to follow, you're teaching bad actors how to hide the tracks of what they're doing, and how can you counter that?
Well, that was what I was worried about with Russia and Ukraine. So it's clearly not really having much of an impact there. But we do take that into consideration. The thing is, to make our case, we have to be transparent about our process and how we work, and to influence other people to do the same kind of work. We also have to be transparent about what we're doing. So in a way, that kind of is counterbalanced against the kind of risk of bad actors learning what we're doing. And Russia certainly has taken steps against the kind of work we're doing. They passed a law a few years back that made it illegal for Russian soldiers, former or current, to share information on social media about any of their military activity. And that was because we had been going through all their social media profiles and like reconstructing units and figuring out who was involved with war crimes and shooting down MH17. So that was kind of the first really big reaction we had. But then we just found out there was a bunch of other stuff we could look into as well. It's not like one door closes and there's no other door. One door closes and there's 10,000 other doors that we can look through. And we're kind of sport for choice. And it doesn't have to be Russia. It can be another country where they've never heard of open source investigation. And that's still wide open. It's like when we did the investigation that ended up being the BBC piece, Anatomy of a Killing, into the murder in Cameroon of 2 women and 2 children. That was basically, at first, the Cameroon government, they gave a press conference after we started our reporting, where they literally had a still from the video with the words "fake news" written underneath it. And a year later, because of our reporting, the same government had those soldiers on trial and they were convicted for those murders. And they kind of weren't really ready for what we were able to do with open source information. We were able to find exactly where the murder took place, the soldiers involved, and other information based off one video. So that, I think, kind of, even though one government or one nation might figure out some of the tricks that we're doing, there's plenty more that don't have a clue and that we can still kind of have a real impact in.
A lot of people are asking how they would get involved. So how does Joe Public get involved in investigations? Somebody asks, how can a layman like me get involved with Bellingcat and what it is doing? A few people asking the same thing. And I know that you get asked that a lot. Yeah,
so what we encourage people to do is engage with the online community on Twitter that's already doing stuff around Ukraine. Figure out how to geolocate a video. We have guides on the website. It's not terribly difficult once you realize it's, basically adults spot the difference. But see what other people do. Look at someone who's geolocated a video, look at the coordinates they've provided, and then just look at the map and the video and figure out how they've matched the stuff off. That's a very simple thing, but it'll get your brain working to think about satellite imagery in relation to the video footage. It's very difficult to, what we don't want to have is a kind of controlled volunteer community, because the very nature of this kind of thing is it's kind of chaotic and it's very socially mediated, and it's ad hoc communities form and collapse all the time. So what we're trying to do is, harness that rather than trying to build a really big internal community of volunteers, because that is very difficult to do. Long term, we're slowly building up an internal volunteers community that I mean, we have a backlog of several hundred applicants for it, so I wouldn't encourage anyone to pop me emails about that. But we're trying to build this community that's specifically trained, because we have to train people to work with traumatic material. So if people are coming to Bellingcat to work as volunteer at Bellingcat, we have a very long integration process where we train them with dealing with material. We show them how to use our system. So that group of actual volunteers are very small, but they're very engaged. But if you want to get involved, like it seems a bit trite, but go on Twitter, see who's sharing stuff. I'm retweeting people all the time who are doing interesting things. Follow them, watch what they're doing. If a video comes out of Ukraine, maybe say, okay, how do I figure out where this was filmed? Or a video coming from anywhere, say, tweet it with the coordinates, with geolocation or geolocated, and we'll just use Twitter search to look for everyone who's posting geolocated or geolocation on one of those things. And it's really just as straightforward as that.
You've mentioned Twitter a lot. You say in the book it's the best wedge into the news media. And Twitter has a lot of too many bad sides to mention, but do you maintain that it's a really important space?
I would say with the conflict in Ukraine at the moment, it's one of the most important spaces for this, because there's so much conversation and kind of interaction and people working in a very positive way. I mean, there's always going to be people who, just suck and believe Putin's great and that all the war crimes are fakes made by Ukraine, but just ignore those people and kind of focus on, the positive aspects of it. Or if you feel like a bit of a fight, just, if someone's saying something's false, say, okay, how do I prove that's not false? What do I need to do to actually say? Geolocate it, so you can figure out when it was filmed, find other videos and evidence around that, and just do that as a process. The best investigators are the people who do that kind of stuff for fun, basically. And you see many people who are like that. They enjoy doing that. And some people make it, their full-time hobby. I mean, there's one guy called Oryx who's basically been counting every single visual documented loss of Russian and Ukrainian military equipment. And he's kind of become one of the most important people for documenting, the actual realistic count of the vehicle losses. And he just has a simple blog. He updates it several times a day. He's a couple of people helping out now because there's so many Russian vehicle losses. But he's actually creating a really useful and accurate data set. And he does that as basically in his spare time as a hobby. And, he produces something that I think most people who are following the conflict on Ukraine seriously take as a very serious measure of the actual real vehicle losses compared to the claims coming from Russia, Ukraine and other parties.
A lot of people are interested in how it's funded. I know at the start you were really, people were doing a lot for free, and people are wondering, how it works now on that front.
Yeah, so over the years, it's kind of, when Bellingcat was launched, it was kick-started for about £56,000, and that was enough for my wage and the cost of the website being set up and designed. That then I started getting small grants here and there from various foundations, and basically I doubled the turnover every year through grants and other donations. Now we're at Brusted's Stichting Foundation in the Netherlands. We have 30 staff members. About 60% of our income comes from various foundations and grants. About 30% comes from workshops that we run, and about 10% is from individual donations. Now, what we're trying to do at the moment is we've actually set up a production company, and we're hoping to start turning our investigations into films and documentaries and other interesting products. It's close to selling our first documentary to a really good production company. So we're hoping the profits from that will then be fed back into the investigation team. And turned into something that's, even more investigations and even more documentaries to sell again and make even more money to, hopefully an increasing cycle rather than a decreasing cycle.
An interesting question. First of all, they say warmest congratulations for the very important job you do. In the interest of playing devil's advocate, you seem to place a lot of trust to geolocation services and satellite imagery. Satellite data do not come from an independent source, though. It is government and intergovernmental agencies that they have placed the satellites to orbit. What extent do your organisation and partners, are you able to verify the satellite imagery you use?
Well, what you have now are commercial satellite imagery firms like Maxar and Planet Labs. Planet, for example, is a company that's not existed for too long, but they've been launching more and more constellations of satellites, and they sell that for commercial purposes. I mean, for one thing, if they start editing their commercial satellite imagery, they're going to lose a lot of customers very, very quickly, because we have their imagery plus imagery from sources like Maxar and other commercial satellite companies that could be cross-referenced against other imagery. So in a way, it's that triangulation going on again. We're also looking at, if we start coming across videos that show something, and then when we look at the satellite imagery and we know it should be there, it's not there, that's going to start becoming a problem for those satellite companies, because it means they're changing their data. I really don't think that's really a huge issue, but there are ways we can take to mitigate that risk. And because triangulation plays such a big role in the work that we're doing, you know, using multiple sources for each piece of evidence, we really do quite a lot to mitigate that risk. I think for the commercial satellite companies, it would be suicidal to do anything like that.
What about this interesting question, and you talk about it in the book about the future of Bellingcat, but also the future of open source information and how to kind of scale it up. And a question here is, how much use is machine-driven analysis to you, or even AI to check material? So I think that there's a part in the book where you talk about the kind of opportunities and the opposite of that AI might bring to all of this.
So one thing I'm trying to put together at the moment is building on the work that we're doing with our archiving for accountability, because we want to take these processes that we've developed and share them with other organizations. And that means other organizations will be creating their own archives. And there's already organizations who've worked on things like Syria that have archives of material. The problem is you then end up with lots and lots of archives of material spread all over the place. So one of the other steps of our accountability is something we call the index on accountability, where a company called Benetech has developed software that allows them to create hashes for videos, files, and all kinds of different file formats that are based off the content of the file. And if the content of the file changes, the hashes changes. So it means that you can kind of make them forensically sound. But it also means you can use those hashes as unique IDs for documents. But it also means if someone downloads a video into one archive from a YouTube channel and the same video is downloaded into another archive, it has the same ID. So you can actually start establishing where all these duplicates are. Now, that's useful in one sense, because then you know who's got copies of stuff, and you can add metadata to the index that allows to make these things searchable, which makes them accessible to these accountability processes in the future. One thing that's also very interesting is you can also use this hash ID to find similar videos. So if you have a video that films the same location but from a different angle, it will have a very similar hash ID. So you can start using that to basically extract groups of files that have been filmed from the same location that might be held in multiple archives, and start using that to kind of almost auto-geolocate videos. Because when you start doing it at that scale, you can end up with, like with Syria, there's one archive that has about 3.5 million files in it, and this is all visual imagery. If you're then able to add a file to the index, let's say you found a new video from a conflict zone, you add it, it can then automatically be compared to similar files, and you basically start auto-geolocating stuff. And that's one way that we can use all this data to make this process a lot easier. You also have now machine learning being used to identify things like cluster munitions in videos. So when you have these masses of videos and you're trying to search through them, you don't have to rely on them being manually tagged. You can actually have a system that's identifying certain vehicles. So Mnemonic Labs, who we work a lot with on archiving, they use something called VFrame that they're training to identify certain types of arms and munitions. The forensic architecture based in the UK, they used a similar system to identify tanks in footage coming from Ukraine in 2015. And these are very effective systems. And when you're dealing with masses and masses of data, you can train them on more and more interesting things, in sounds, objects, and all kinds of information. And if you can then have that working across multiple archives, what you start having is a very enriched data environment where you can do a lot of different things with that information. And that's kind of, that index for accountability is kind of my next big project over the next few years.
Well, I hope you'll come back again and talk to us about that. And I'm sure I hope there'll be more books to have the sort of insider access to all the extraordinary things that go on. But unfortunately, it seems to be an hour gone flying by. I'm sure you probably I hope you have some sort of form of a rest this evening from the relentless news cycle at the moment. But thank you all very much indeed for signing in, for your brilliant questions. And Eliot, thank you so much for joining us.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me.